these are just some of my thoughts on Charlottesville and what had happened at the recent Unite the Right gatherings inside of Charlottesville. Considering that I'm taking this from my South African perspective, I can consider what had happened in Charlottesville almost the opposite of what had happened with the Rhodes Must Fall protests, even though the dynamic was somewhat different. But at the end of the day, also was about a statue and what it historically was representing. Just in our case, it was a statue of Rhodes, Sir Cecil John Rhodes, and his statue at the University of Cape Town, whereby we had numerous student protests with regards to the fact that the statue was still allowed to stand at the institution, which is UCT, and trying to accustom its historical representation to a modern world and how terrible that is and how its mere existence is oppressive, unfortunately. And this is to some degree no different to what they are doing in Charlottesville with regards to the statue of Robert E. Lee on what is now called the Emancipation Park, where the Unite the Right gathering was going to take place just this past while. However, it should come as no surprise that people would be people would want to remove the statue. I know about another statue that recently got removed, I believe, at Durham in America as well, where the statue was completely toppled. It was also a Confederate general. I'm not exactly sure which Confederate general at this moment in time, but it is interesting that, and again, you'll also see that the majority of the people which had taken part on both sides, actually, strangely enough, were young people. We had young people that was on the Unite the Right faction and protesting for the safeguarding of historic monuments, actually, at the end of the day, with regards to them wanting to protest in to keep the statue of Robert E. Lee on the park, which used to be the Lee Park, if I understand correctly, and is no longer the Lee Park, but is now the Emancipation Park. But it is very interesting that to see how this whole thing has turned out. Interestingly enough, as well, perhaps somewhat of a astrological spin to it, if you will. I mean, on the 12th of August, we also had the Perseus meteorite shower, and Perseus, of course, was the Greek demigod who went and defeated Medusa and had done also quite a few other feats as well, and had done far more than the gods could have imagined. And perhaps this is a case of Perseus syndrome, which has perhaps finally seeped down into the archetypal subconscious of Western man, which would be quite interesting if that's the case. That means finally Perseus awakes, if you will. And finally we're now seeing a semblance of people that are just, they can't take it anymore. They can't take this nonsense anymore. They can't take being derailed. They can't take, I experience this on a daily basis at my own BA faculty, at my university, where every day we're just derailed, purely on the basis that I happen to have a European heritage. And purely on that basis, everything else, every other great evil deed done by every other nation and people on earth is just simply forgotten, as though somehow there is this application of a moral standard, a singular one, but it's applied differently purely because there happens to be a different racial phenotype which exists, purely because we might have been better at certain things than other groups of people, and because of that I'm now being held liable. I'm not to bear the fruits of my forefathers, but rather bear the chains of my forefathers. It is also very interesting to see that it should come as no surprise, however, that we have so many Antifa, particularly as we had seen quite recently at Charlottesville. And this is not the first time. I believe in May they also had a gathering at Charlottesville, particularly people like Richard Spencer. And it should come as no surprise that these people would be in opposition to whatever it is the alt-right is. I'm not going to term it as the media has, terming them white nationalists and Nazis and extremists and all a bunch of linguistic hogwash, really. I'm not going to do that, but what I will do is I'm going to just term it the alt-right, and whatever the alt-right is, it is something which is needed to come for quite some time, and I believe Charlottesville will be a serious turning point. And finally, we are now seeing how America and the middle ground politics, the centralist politics, which is at the end of the day very apathetic politic anyway. It stands for nothing truly, and concedes too much to one or the other side, and it's actually nonsense as well, and has no virtuous grounding truly. Even though they believe that by taking the centrist point, you are now taking some moral high ground, which it's nonsense really at the end of the day. But yes, of course, these people would be against the notion of excuse me, the notion of Europeans wanting to keep their heritage, because of how dare you have an identity if I don't have one, for example, is the notion which has been taken at, say, even at my university, with the whole decolonization practice or Africanization of our universities, for example. How dare you have an identity and I not? How dare you do that? How dare you even want to protect such a thing? And that they are so arrogant to believe that we won't want to protect that which is ours. It's actually quite terrible, really. The only difference, really, between the Rhodes Must Fall protests and the Unite the Right protests, with regards to the valuing of history, and the valuing of historical symbolism, and the valuing of the essence of what history is, was defended, at least to some degree, on Emancipation Park. And again, I'm also very sorry for anyone who perished in this unfortunate collapse, which was in any case very much, I personally believe, the state's fault. They did not handle the protest well. To some degree, they had funneled the two groups to come into conflict with each other. That became quite evident when one considers how they had handled the case. In retrospect, at least, I can't say whether or not that was intentional, but there were some very unwise decisions made by the state police, which unfortunately, to my mind, did contribute to the loss of life. And I believe that the state should be held accountable for that. You can't, I mean, I've seen numerous interviews where they keep on trying to placate the so-called white nationalists. I mean, had you not had this gathering, no one would have died. And they keep on trying to impose a certain amount of guilt on the legally, the people who have decided to legally gather at Emancipation Park and actually stand up for their rights. So they are somehow the guilty party, and the anti-fascist movements which had came in counter-protest illegally, and who also indeed were implicated in quite a sum of violence. There was no positive segregation between the two groups, and this is the point that I'm making, that the police that doesn't separate two groups which are clearly going to come into physical altercation when they come into contact with each other. If that is fairly evident even to the reasonable person, then for the state police not to have seen something like that happen would be silly. I mean, I've seen that again on interviews where they speak to the so-called white nationalists and say, but did you not think that had you had this protest, you would not be in opposition, that people would not come in opposition with you? It's absolute nonsense at the end of the day. The state was supposed to protect particularly the people which had legally binding documents which did allow them on that park and did allow them to gather. I mean, at the end of the day, the police has really not done its job properly and should be held accountable, therefore. But these are just some of my thoughts on the Charlottesville incident, if you will, and the consequential split in American politics between left and right, and the degradation of the center. yeah, these are just some of my thoughts and ramblings.